Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a figure who, well, loomed large over North Korea for decades. Someone whose public image felt both everywhere and incredibly opaque.
Kim Jong-il, the second leader of the DPRK.
Exactly. We got a stack of sources covering his life, his career, and honestly, a surprisingly personal world, too.
And our mission here really is to cut through those carefully constructed narratives, the myths, the mysteries, to understand who he was.
Right. And how he ruled, and maybe why those details matter for grasping, the nature of the North Korean state itself.
We're going from his contested origins right through to some pretty surprising facts about his hobbies and even how his legacy is being sort of reshaped today.
Okay, let's unpack the very beginning then. Right off the bat, the sources hit us with a fascinating conflict. Where and when was Kim Jong-il actually born?
Yeah, it's not straightforward. On one side, you've got Soviet records.
Okay, what do they say?
That data points to a birth in the Soviet Far East, 1941. His father, Kim Il-sung, was actually there with the Soviet Army Brigade then.
Huh. So a Soviet connection from the start.
Definitely. Even his birth name, Yuri Arsenovich, Kim people called him Yura, has these, clear Russian roots.
But then there's the official North Korean version. Completely different.
No, absolutely. Dramatically different. The official narrative puts his birth a year later, 1942, and crucially, on Mount Paektu.
Which is a hugely significant place in Korean mythology and history.
Exactly. It's deeply tied to revolutionary history. And what's fascinating is how this official story isn't just like a different date and place. It's a deliberate act of deification.
Deification?
Mm-hmm. Declared officially in 1982, the site literally became a revolutionary sacred place. It elevates his birth from just history to, national myth, ties him directly to his father's revolutionary legend.
That contrast right there tells you so much about the regime's focus on narrative control.
Right from the beginning.
Okay, so that's a powerful start. He eventually returns to Korea, late 1945. Sources mention some early hardship, though.
Yes. His childhood saw some significant loss. His younger brother died in an accident in 1947, and then his mother passed away just 2 years later in 49.
Tough start.
Yeah. Initially described as pretty introverted, apparently, though he seems to have become more sociable later on. He even spent some time at school in China during the Korean War.
Adding another layer. And his path into the party structure, that started pretty early too, didn't it?
It did. After Kim Il-sung University, he joined the Workers' Party of Korea in 1961, started working his way up within the party central committee.
Any particular departments?
Notably, organization and significantly propaganda. Those roles, especially propaganda, you can see how they'd prove incredibly relevant later.
Makes sense. And he had mentors.
He was even mentored by Hwang Jung-yup, who was a key figure in developing Juche ideology.
The core state philosophy.
Right, emphasizing self-reliance, the leader's absolute role, really foundational stuff.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, I think. His climb to become the designated successor in the 1970s. This wasn't just handed to him on a plate, was it?
Oh, far from it. It was a calculated, strategic ascent. He gained key positions, central committee member, party secretary.
Gains titles.
Exactly. And by February 1974, he was internally endorsed as the successor. But he had to consolidate that. He launched initiatives like the Three Revolutions Red Flag movement.
What was that exactly?
Well, on the surface, it was a mass mobilization campaign, ideological, technical, cultural revolutions, that kind of thing. But really, it also served to place his loyalists in key positions across the country.
Ah, smart. So consolidating power meant tackling potential rivals, too. Sources mention his uncle.
Yes, that was a big one. A significant power struggle with his uncle, Kim Young-ju, who was a very prominent party figure himself.
How did he handle that?
Kim Jong-il publicly denounced him, called him an anti-party element. A classic tactic, really, to sideline opposition.
And he was involved in drafting key ideological documents.
Hugely instrumental. Particularly the 10 Principles for the Establishment of the Party's Monolithic Ideological System, published in '74.
That sounds important.
Oh, it's foundational. It basically demanded absolute loyalty to Kim Il-sung and implicitly to his chosen successor. Think of it as the ideological blueprint, solidifying the personality cult, the structure of absolute power around the leader.
What's so fascinating is that his role as successor, it wasn't announced publicly for ages. He was just called party center.
Precisely. And that was deliberate. For years, people didn't actually know who Party Center was,
Huh?
just that it was this powerful entity behind Kim Il-sung.
Why do that?
Well, that anonymity let him consolidate power behind the scenes without immediate external scrutiny or, internal backlash from those perhaps unsure about hereditary succession. Very clever, really.
Building on that, the 1980s saw this consolidation process intensify. Sources mention another potential challenge, this time involving his stepmother.
Yeah, there's a reported struggle there as well. Apparently, his stepmother favored his half-brother Kim Jong-il for the succession. He saw him as more suited for a military role.
So how did Kim Jong-il counter that?
His strategy wasn't just political maneuvering in the traditional sense. It involved actively enhancing his father's charisma, his cult of personality, while simultaneously building his own loyalty networks, separate from the old power structures.
Drawing on those propaganda skills again, maybe?
Very likely. He's described as incredibly skilled in these internal party struggles, information control. That early experience in the film bureau doing propaganda probably gave him a really keen understanding of narrative perception control.
And he had a particular style. Sources mention parties.
Yes, this unique party politics style. Less about formal meetings, more about gathering potential allies at these, elaborate parties, showering attendees with gifts, building personal loyalty.
Quite the networker.
In his own way. Sources even mention figures like the abducted South Korean actress Choi Eun-hee being present at some of these gatherings. It highlights the kind of bizarre mix of people in his orbit.
And his formal status really solidified in 1980.
That's the year. His first public appearance and gaining those key titles. Political Bureau Presidium member, Central Military Commission member. A clear shift from the anonymous party center to a public figure.
Though still under his father's shadow, presumably.
Oh, absolutely. But the path was clear. Some sources even view that period from 1980 onwards as effectively a kind of joint rule with Kim Il-sung.
Really? Co-rulers?
That perspective is definitely out there. With Kim Jong-il increasingly taking charge of the military internal party affairs, it's argued they were ruling in tandem, preparing for the inevitable succession.
And the justification for this hereditary handover?
It wasn't framed just on being Kim Il-sung's son, that was part of it, of course, but the emphasis was on him being the most excellent successor, highlighting his capabilities, his ideological purity.
And disturbingly, specific details link him to some major international incidents in the 80s.
Yes, sources connect him directly to the 1983 Rangoon bombing. That was an assassination attempt against the visiting South Korean president in Burma.
Horrific.
And also the 1987 bombing of Korean Airlines Flight 858 killed everyone on board.
What was the thinking behind those, according to the sources?
Some analyses suggest they weren't just, acts of state terrorism, but possibly attempts by Kim Jong-il himself to prove his revolutionary credentials, his ruthlessness, maybe to impress his father and consolidate his position even further.
Wow. Interestingly, even his early diplomatic efforts had friction. A visit to China in '83 didn't go too smoothly.
No. Sources claim he openly criticized China's economic reforms under Deng Xiaoping, called them revisionism.
That's a serious ideological insult from a North Korean perspective.
Huge. Apparently, it led Deng Xiaoping himself to dismiss him as an idiot, and Kim Il-sung reportedly had to apologize to the Chinese leadership for his son's comments.
Shows his early ideological rigidity clashing with the neighbors.
Definitely. A sign of things to come, perhaps.
So by the 1990s, was he also solidifying his military control?
Absolutely crucial step. Through appointments like first vice chairman and then chairman of the National Defense Commission, the NDC.
And that NDC role became really important.
Paramount. It was later enshrined in the Constitution as the highest position in the state. This gave him undeniable control over the military, backed by constitutional changes elevating the NDC's status.
Any other moves around then?
Sources also note he purged Soviet-educated individuals around this time. This was likely about removing potential challenges, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union removed a major ideological patron and ally, further consolidating his own authority.
Okay, let's move into his time as supreme leader after Kim Il-sung's death in 1994.
Yeah.
The formal transition, it wasn't immediate, was it?
Correct. There was a lengthy official mourning period. He didn't immediately grab all of his father's titles. He became General Secretary of the Workers' Party in 97.
And head of the military commission.
Chairman of the National Defense Commission in 98. And as we said, that NDC chairmanship was later explicitly defined as the highest position of the state. cementing his primary source of authority, really emphasizing that military first, or Songun, rule.
And his early years actually running the country were marked by, well, immense, devastating hardship.
Catastrophic. This period saw the arduous March famine, economic collapse, exacerbated by natural disasters, loss of Soviet support. Hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, died.
A horrific time.
And this era also coincided with large-scale purges. Old party cadres, their families, reportedly orchestrated by his powerful brother-in-law, Jiang Songthek, removing anyone potentially loyal to the old system or seen as a threat.
So amidst this absolute domestic crisis, we then see a shift in foreign relations in the early 2000s.
Yes, it's interesting. After years of relative isolation following his father's death, he started making foreign trips again, primarily to China and Russia.
Who did he meet?
Leaders like Jiang Zemin, Putin, Medvedev, later Hu Jintao. These trips were largely focused on securing economic aid and diplomatic support, trying to shore things up.
And a major, highly symbolic event was the Inter-Korean Summit in 2000 with South Korean President Kim Dae-jung.
That was a landmark moment, no doubt. Resulted in the June 15th joint declaration, talk of reunification, reconciliation. Huge headlines.
But there was a controversial side to that, too.
Yes, sources reveal a large secret payment from South Korea's Hyundai Group to the north right around the time of the summit.
Secret payment? For what?
Reports suggest this money, allegedly tied to the summit happening, went directly to Kim Jong-il, his eldest son Kim Jong-nam, and Jiang Songthek. It raises serious questions about the motivations, the financing behind that thaw in relations.
He even opened relations with some Western countries then, briefly.
Yeah, a brief window saw North Korea establish diplomatic ties with nations like Italy, the UK, a shift that seemed to signal maybe a potential, albeit limited, opening to the West.
His 2001 visit to Shanghai is particularly interesting. Sources seem kind of divided on what that meant.
Right. He visited Shanghai, which was, the poster child for China's rapid economic reform. He even reportedly praised it, said something like, "Shanghai's heaven and earth changed."
So was he genuinely interested in reform?
That's the debate. Some sources saw it as genuine interest, maybe recognizing the dire state of his own economy, thinking about adopting similar reforms. Others viewed it much more cynically.
How so?
As a performance, calculated to impress China, secure more aid by just appearing open to their model without any real intention of following through.
Then international tension ramps up again sharply, especially after 9/11.
Absolutely. The U.S. labels North Korea part of the axis of evil in 2002. Big moment.
And his reaction?
In response, or perhaps just accelerating existing plans, Kim Jong-il really doubled down on his Songun military-first politics, prioritizing the military above everything, and employed that brinkmanship diplomacy.
Pushing crises to the edge.
Exactly. Missile tests, nuclear threats, pushing things right to the brink to try and extract concessions or aid from the international community.
For Japan, a key moment was that 2002 summit with Prime Minister Koizumi.
Hugely significant for Japan. Kim Jong-il made this unprecedented admitted North Korea had abducted 13 Japanese citizens decades earlier.
Wow. Did he apologize?
He offered a verbal apology, yes,
Yeah.
and blamed it on blind followers within special agencies, sort of deflecting direct responsibility. It aimed to normalize relations through the Pyongyang Declaration, but the abductee issue remains a massive point of tension even today.
And China continued to play a mediating role, though maybe a complicated one.
Yes, China was often the go-between, especially during high-tension periods, missile launches, the Iraq War providing context. Sources mention China even briefly stopping oil supply to North Korea in 2003.
Really? Did that work?
Well, it's reported to have significantly influenced Pyongyang's decision to join the six-party talks, which were aimed at denuclearization. Shows the leverage China had when it chose to use it.
But that relationship seemed to cool again later on.
It seems so. By a 2010 visit he made to China, relations appeared more strained. China's official language was more careful, less effusive about the friendship.
Any specific incidents?
Notably, Premier Wen Jiabao reportedly refused a large aid request from Kim Jong-il. Sources suggest that refusal led Kim to cut his trip short. It kind of indicates the transactional nature of the relationship, maybe China's growing impatience.
Domestically, sources paint a picture of continued struggle in his later years, despite the image.
Yeah, despite the carefully crafted public image, internal documents or reports sometimes reveal the underlying issues. There's a quote from the Labor newspaper in 2010, supposedly from Kim Jong-il.
What did it say?
Showing his purported concern about people eating corn rice, expressing a desire for them to have white rice and bread, It's a subtle acknowledgement, perhaps, of the ongoing food insecurity.
But overall,
Ultimately, failed economic policies, international sanctions, his own declining health. It all contributed to a sense, reported by some observers, that the country was really on a cliff edge.
and in his final years, we see him focusing on securing the future, appearing with his successor.
That became a very clear priority. He ramped up diplomatic engagements with allies like China and Russia, still seeking aid, probably, but maybe more importantly,
Yes.
using these trips, domestic appearances, to introduce and elevate his designated successor, his youngest son, Kim Jong-un, preparing for the leadership transition, setting the stage for what would happen upon his death in 2011.
Okay, so that's the trajectory of his power and rule. Let's talk about the man himself. The sources offer a surprisingly complex, often contradictory picture compared to that public persona.
Oh, absolutely. The state media elevated him, alongside Kim Il-sung, to an almost divine status. The Japanese term is shinkakuka, deified.
Deified, how?
They used over 100 different epithets to describe him, including these militaristic ones like Steel General of 100 Victories, which is striking because, well, he had zero actual combat command experience.
Right, he was mostly known as...
Commonly just General Nim. General.
It's wild how that term party center was used for so long before people even knew who it was.
Right. It took years for that veil of anonymity to lift, adding to the mystique, the power, before he was formally introduced. And the mystical elements of his deification got extreme.
Like what?
Stories about him being able to use chukjibiop,
What's that?
the mythical ability to shrink distance, basically teleportation. Similar myths surrounded his father. It's pure mythology designed to reinforce this superhuman status.
But what's fascinating now is that recent sources, especially linked to Kim Jong-un's actions since he became leader, suggest a shift away from that level of extreme deification for his predecessors.
This is where you see the current leader actively shaping or reshaping the historical narrative. Kim Jong-un has reportedly stated that deifying leaders to such an extent actually hides the truth.
That's a remarkable statement coming from inside that system.
It really is. And state media articles since around 2019 have even started reinterpreting chukjibiop, moving away from describing it as some spiritual or magical ability.
How do they explain it now?
More towards a metaphorical concept, like overcoming obstacles quickly through sheer will or leadership. Witnessing a leader actively dismantling parts of his own father's and grandfather's cult of personality, it's quite significant.
Okay, let's talk about the personal side then. Sources paint a very different image from the public figure we saw.
Yeah, the private life details are extensive and often disturbing. He reportedly had many wives, numerous lovers. Stories circulate about foreign women, some allegedly abducted, being brought to parties for his entertainment.
That's incredibly dark.
And sources suggest this aspect of his life, particularly the treatment of women, contributed to a strained relationship later on with his son, Kim Jong-un.
His appearance was also quite distinctive, wasn't it?
Yes, instantly recognizable, frequently seen in that unique zip-up jacket and slacks combo, reportedly custom-made from luxury materials, of course, and almost always wearing sunglasses.
Different from his father's style.
Very. Kim Il-sung was often seen in uniform. Kim Jong-il rarely appeared publicly in military attire, though portraits of him in uniform do exist.
And he apparently had a fear of flying. That seems relevant for a world leader.
Sources consistently claim he had a strong fear of flying, which is why he famously used that armored train for pretty much all his foreign travel.
Except for one time.
Except for one documented flight back in 1965, alongside his father during a visit to Indonesia. But otherwise, yeah, that fear dictated his international movements. The train it was.
There are also intriguing details about connections to religious figures or groups, like the Unification Church.
Yes, connections to the Unification Church, led by Moon Sun-myung, are mentioned. This apparently included reported meetings, promises of aid from the church, even some joint ventures.
But it wasn't a smooth relationship.
No. Sources also note that later on, North Korean authorities began monitoring, even arresting, Unification Church cadres within the country. Shows the sort of precariousness, the transactional nature of any such relationship with the regime.
And financially, sources claim he amassed significant hidden wealth abroad. Is that substantiated?
Well, it's a striking detail often highlighted in reports and defector testimonies. Sources allege he held substantial secret accounts, places like Macau are often mentioned, and estimates of the total run into the billions.
Billions. Where would that come from?
One source claims as high as $360 billion, though that figure seems incredibly high and hard to verify. The wealth was reportedly derived from illicit activities selling nuclear and missile technology, drug trafficking, counterfeiting.
And the purpose of this wealth?
The idea, allegedly, was to ensure a luxurious life for himself and his inner circle, even if the regime were somehow to collapse. A personal insurance policy, funded by the state's illicit dealings.
Despite that often portrayed ruthless, arrogant public image, there are these anecdotes suggesting moments of, personal consideration, even self-reflection.
Yes, and these anecdotes are surprising. They complicate the picture. The story from his Japanese chef, Kenji Fujimoto, is often cited.
What happened?
Fujimoto recounted instances where Kim Jong-il would say, throw money in anger during a party, but then later, unexpectedly, apologize to him privately for his earlier rudeness. These small moments, if true, they paint a slightly more nuanced human picture. It contrasts sharply with that image of the absolute, unforgiving dictator. Doesn't excuse anything, but adds complexity.
Okay, let's dive into his hobbies and tastes. This is where some of the most well-known, almost quirky details emerge. He was a film buff.
Massive film buff, bordering on obsessive, by all accounts. He had this huge personal collection of videos, tens of thousands, estimates say, and he even wrote a book called On the Art of the Cinema.
Did he only watch North Korean films?
Oh no, he watched foreign films voraciously, apparently loved Japanese movies like Godzilla, the Torsan comedy series, a real cinephile in his own way.
And this love of film led to some extraordinary, infamous actions, didn't it?
Infamously, yes, the abduction story. He orchestrated the kidnapping of a prominent South Korean film director, Shin Sae-morg, and the famous actress Choi In-hee in the late 1970s.
Kidnap them. To do what?
Specifically, to make movies for him. Their story is incredible forced filmmaking, including making the monster movie Pulbasari before they eventually managed to escape years later. It's stranger than fiction.
Speaks volumes about his power and his very specific controlling interests.
Absolutely. If he wanted filmmakers, he'd just get them.
Beyond film, other interests.
He reportedly enjoyed basketball, dance, apparently, and he had a very strong preference for Mercedes-Benz cars, imported numerous luxury vehicles despite the country's widespread poverty.
Okay. Perhaps one of the most memorable and certainly debated anecdotes is the golf story.
The golf score, yes. This one really highlights that disconnect between official narrative and, well, reality.
What is the claim?
The widely reported claim, originating from the Pyongyang golf course, is that on his first ever round of golf back in 1994, he shot an unbelievable 38 under par.
38 under. Including
supposedly 11 hole-in-ones.
That's statistically impossible. For anyone, let alone a beginner on their first round.
Exactly. And sources presenting this claim often immediately follow it up with counterclaims, denying it, calling it fabricated propaganda, noting the global satirical reaction to the story after his death.
That's a perfect illustration, isn't it? The regime promoting utterly absurd facts as part of the leader's legend.
Couldn't make it up? Well, they did.
And sources confirm he was quite the gourmet. Expensive tastes.
Incredibly expensive tastes in food, especially stark given the widespread hunger in North Korea. He enjoyed things like shark fin soup, high-end Japanese food, sushi, sukiyaki.
Any specific brands mentioned?
Specific imported brands of mayonnaise like Kewpie, soy sauce like Kikkoman, even particular types of Japanese instant noodles like Nissan Cup Noodle Roe. Very specific preferences.
Must have been hard to get that stuff.
Importing those luxury foods became increasingly difficult as international sanctions tightened over the years, but for him, they found ways.
Finally, a personal habit that had a public echo. Smoking.
Yes, he was reportedly a heavy smoker for about 20 years, but then quit later in life, apparently due to health concerns.
And the public echo.
Interestingly, after he quit, he reportedly pushed for anti-smoking campaigns among the general population. A small detail, maybe, but shows how his personal decisions could sometimes trickle down into policy or social campaigns.
So, stepping back from all these details, why does diving into Kim Jong-il really matter to you, our listener?
Well, understanding this figure isn't just about, listing historical facts or gossiping about strange habits. It offers crucial insights into how a totalitarian regime actually works.
How so?
How personality cults are constructed, how they're maintained day to day, the stark, often shocking contrast between the public image presented to the world and the private reality of those holding absolute power, and the methods used to control not just a population, but international perceptions too.
And the surprising facts we've talked about, the manipulated birth story, the loyalty building through parties and gifts, that incredible story of abducting filmmakers.
Right, or the alleged scale of his hidden wealth, those conflicting anecdotes about his character, and yes, even that utterly baffling golf score.
They help paint a more nuanced picture, right? Even if it's still a deeply concerning one. More than just applying a simple label like dictator.
Exactly. They reveal the deliberate performance of leadership within such a closed system. A system where truth is incredibly malleable and where personal whims, personal tastes can intersect directly with state policy and state terror.
That brings us towards the end of this deep dive into the sources surrounding Kim Jong-il. We've journeyed from his mysterious, heavily propagandized origins through that calculated ascent to power.
His time as supreme leader, navigating unimaginable domestic hardship, the arduous march and those high-stakes international tensions, the brinkmanship.
And explored the surprising facets of his personal life, his interests, and even how his deification is now being subtly renegotiated by his successor.
So here's a provocative thought for you to mull over, based on all this. Considering the sources describe both that intense, state-driven deification of Kim Jong-il, the myths, the titles, and also these scattered, seemingly contradictory personal moments of apology or vulnerability, what does that duality tell us?
What does it tell us about the immense pressure, the performative nature of holding absolute power in such a system?
And perhaps more pointedly, what does it signify when even a carefully constructed multi-decade narrative of almost divine leadership starts to be altered piece by piece by the very successor it was built to legitimize? What does that mean for the future of the narrative?
Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.